Marcus Thompson sat on the cold concrete steps outside the downtown library, clutching his last cup of coffee like it was liquid gold. The steam rose from the cracked paper cup, warming his face against the bitter morning wind. 3 months ago, he had been a software engineer with a corner office and a decent salary. Now he was just another face in the growing crowd of people the city had forgotten. The coffee was terrible, bitter, and lukewarm, but it was his only luxury. He had scraped together enough coins from his pocket to buy it from the gas station down the street. The clerk had given him a pitying look that made his stomach twist with shame. Marcus tried to ignore the stares of people walking past, their expensive shoes clicking against the sidewalk as they hurried to jobs he could no longer imagine having. He was halfway through his coffee when the sky began to change. At first it looked like clouds gathering for a storm, but the darkness moved with too much purpose. The air itself seemed to hum with energy, making the hair on his arms stand up. Other people on the street stopped walking and pointed upward, their voices rising in confusion and fear. The massive ship descended from the clouds like a mountain falling from heaven. It was bigger than any building Marcus had ever seen, its surface gleaming with metals that seemed to shift color in the light. Strange symbols glowed along its hull, pulsing with a rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat. The ship settled over the city park across the street, its shadow covering several blocks and turning day into twilight. Panic erupted around him. People screamed and ran in every direction, bumping into each other and dropping their belongings. Cars honked their horns frantically as traffic came to a complete stop. Marcus remained frozen on the steps, his coffee cup trembling in his hands. Part of him wondered if this was some kind of hallucination brought on by hunger and stress. A beam of light shot down from the ship, bright as lightning, but steady as a laser. It struck the ground in the center of the park, and when the light faded, a figure stood where it had been. Even from a distance, Marcus could see that whoever it was definitely not human. The figure was tall, much taller than any person he had ever seen, and moved with a grace that seemed almost liquid. The being began walking toward the street, and as it got closer, Marcus could make out more details. It was definitely female, with skin that looked like polished copper and hair that flowed behind her like water. She wore robes that seemed to be made of starlight itself, shifting and sparkling with every step. But it was her size that truly amazed him. She had to be at least 12 feet tall, maybe more. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer by the second. Marcus knew he should run like everyone else, but something kept him glued to the spot. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was the fact that he had so little left to lose that even an alien invasion seemed like an interesting change of pace. The alien woman stopped at the edge of the park and looked around. Her eyes were huge and golden, like twin suns. And when her gaze swept across the street, Marcus felt like she was looking directly into his soul. She raised one hand, and her voice rang out across the chaos, somehow audible over all the noise. Her words were in a language he had never heard before, but somehow he understood them perfectly. She was looking for someone, she said. Someone worthy, someone who had lost everything but still maintained their dignity, someone who understood what it meant to have nothing and yet still hope for something better. Marcus felt his coffee cup slip from his numb fingers. It hit the concrete step and bounced, splashing the last of his coffee across his worn sneakers and the library steps. The dark liquid spread in a small puddle around his feet, and he stared at it in horror. That coffee had been his last dollar, his only comfort in a world that had turned cold and unforgiving. The alien woman's head turned at the sound of the cup hitting the ground. Her golden eyes locked onto his, and Marcus felt the world around him fade away. She began walking toward him, her massive form moving with impossible elegance. Each step she took seemed to make the ground vibrate slightly, and the air around her shimmered with some kind of energy field. As she approached, Marcus could see that her features were both alien and beautiful. Her face was longer than a human's, with high cheekbones and a jaw that came to a subtle point. Her skin had an inner glow, as if lit from within by some cosmic fire. Ornate jewelry decorated her neck and arms, made from metals he could not identify and gems that seemed to contain entire galaxies. She stopped directly in front of him, towering above the library steps. When she spoke again, her voice was like music played on instruments he had never heard. The words appeared in his mind rather than entering through his ears, and he realized she was communicating through some form of telepathy. The woman introduced herself as Empress Zarathis, ruler of 7 worlds across 3 different star systems. She explained that she had come to Earth following ancient prophecies that spoke of a being from this small blue planet who would become her chosen consort and help her govern her vast empire. The prophecies had led her here, to this exact moment, to find the one whose spirit called out across the void. Marcus tried to speak but found his throat completely dry. Here he was, sitting on library steps with coffee stains on his shoes and holes in his jacket, being propositioned by an alien empress who ruled multiple worlds. It was so absurd that he almost started laughing. But the serious expression on her face stopped him. She extended one enormous hand toward him, her fingers long and elegant, tipped with what looked like claws made of crystallized starlight. Her voice filled his mind again, asking if he would accept her offer. She promised him power beyond imagination, wealth that would make Earth's richest people look like paupers, and a chance to help guide civilizations across the galaxy. Marcus looked down at the spilled coffee spreading around his feet, then back up at the towering alien Empress. In the distance, he could hear military vehicles approaching, their engines roaring as they prepared to deal with this unprecedented situation. He had about 30 seconds to make a decision that would either change his life forever or get him committed to a mental institution. Marcus stared at the outstretched hand of Empress Zarathis, his mind racing through every rational thought he could muster. This was insane, completely, utterly insane. 3 hours ago, his biggest concern had been finding enough change to buy a sandwich from the vending machine. Now he was being offered the chance to rule alien worlds by a being who looked like she had stepped out of the most elaborate science fiction movie ever made. The military vehicles were getting closer. He could hear helicopters approaching from multiple directions, their rotors chopping through the air with increasing urgency. Soon this entire area would be swarming with soldiers, scientists, and government officials who would want to study both the Empress and anyone who had contact with her. If he was going to make a decision, it had to be now. Marcus looked around at the world he would be leaving behind. The cracked sidewalks, the overflowing trash cans, the homeless shelter where he had spent the last 3 months fighting for a bed every night, the job market that had chewed him up and spit him out despite his computer science degree and years of experience. The society that had labeled him as disposable the moment his company decided to downsize. What exactly was he giving up? A life of scraping by, of constant rejection, of watching other people live the dreams he had once thought were his birthright. A world where having a college education and work experience meant nothing if you were over 40 and had been unemployed for more than 6 months. The Empress waited patiently, her golden eyes never leaving his face. There was something in her expression that reminded him of recognition, as if she had been searching for him specifically and had finally found what she was looking for. It was not pity or charity he saw there, but genuine interest and perhaps even respect. Marcus thought about the coffee he had just spilled. That $1 could have bought him a can of soup or a small bag of chips. Instead, he had chosen the coffee because it made him feel human, made him feel like he still had some small control over his life. Now even that was gone, soaked into the concrete like so many of his other dreams. He stood up slowly, his knees protesting after sitting on the cold steps for so long. The Empress was even more imposing at this angle, her presence radiating power and authority that made the air around her feel charged with electricity. Her robes moved in a wind that seemed to come from nowhere, and the jewelry around her neck caught light that had no obvious source. The sound of boots on pavement made him turn. A squad of soldiers was approaching from the east, their weapons drawn but not yet aimed. Behind them, he could see news vans pulling up, their satellite dishes already extending skyward. Within minutes, this would become a media circus that would consume both of them. Marcus looked back at the Empress and made his choice. He reached out and placed his hand in hers. The moment their skin made contact, the world exploded into light and sensation. Images flooded his mind at impossible speed, showing him glimpses of the 7 worlds he was being offered. He saw cities that floated among the clouds, their spires reaching toward twin suns. He witnessed vast space fleets moving between star systems, their hulls gleaming with the same shifting metals as the Empress's ship. He experienced the weight of decisions that affected billions of lives across multiple galaxies. But more than that, he felt the Empress's memories and emotions flowing into his consciousness. He understood that she had been alone for centuries, ruling her empire with wisdom and strength but lacking someone who could truly understand the burden of leadership. Her people respected and feared her, But none could relate to the isolation that came with absolute power. She had searched countless worlds for someone who possessed both the intelligence to help her govern and the experience of loss necessary to understand compassion. Earth's databases had been scanned, its population analyzed through methods he could not comprehend. Every human who had ever lived had been evaluated against criteria established by prophecies older than human civilization. Marcus saw himself through her eyes, and what he found there surprised him. She did not see a failed software engineer or a homeless man. She saw someone who had maintained his integrity despite losing everything, who had never become bitter or cruel despite being treated unfairly by the world. She saw potential that even he had forgotten existed. The connection between them deepened, and he began to understand the nature of the partnership she was offering. It was not just about ruling worlds or commanding fleets. It was about bringing together two different perspectives to create something greater than either could achieve alone. His human understanding of struggle and perseverance would complement her cosmic wisdom and technological mastery. The light around them intensified, and Marcus felt his body beginning to change. It was not painful, but it was profound. His cells were being restructured, enhanced to allow him to survive in environments that would kill an unmodified human. His brain was being expanded to process information at speeds necessary for interstellar governance. His lifespan was being extended to match hers, ensuring they could work together for centuries to come. As the transformation progressed, he retained his essential humanity while gaining capabilities that bordered on the divine. He could suddenly perceive electromagnetic spectrums invisible to normal human eyes. His hearing expanded to catch frequencies that revealed the true music of the spheres. His mind could now process multiple complex calculations simultaneously, while still maintaining emotional connections to individual beings. The soldiers reached the edge of the park, but they stopped as if hitting an invisible wall. The Empress had erected some kind of barrier that prevented anyone from interfering with the bonding process. Marcus could see them shouting into their radios, calling for backup and specialized equipment that would never be enough to breach alien defenses. Through his enhanced senses, Marcus could now perceive the Empress's ship more clearly. It was not just a vessel but a living entity. Grown rather than built, its consciousness intertwined with that of its Empress. The ship was eager to depart, having completed its mission of finding the prophesied consort. It pulsed with anticipation, ready to carry its expanded crew back to the empire that awaited their return. The transformation reached completion, and Marcus felt himself become something new while remaining fundamentally himself. He was still the man who had cared enough to spend his last dollar on coffee, still the person who had maintained hope despite overwhelming evidence that the world had no place for him. But now he possessed the tools necessary to shape reality on a cosmic scale. Empress Zarathis smiled at him, and he realized he could now understand the full depth of emotion in her alien features. Relief, joy, anticipation, and something that might have been love flowed between them through their mental connection. She had been searching for so long that she had begun to doubt the prophecies. Finding him had restored her faith in destiny itself. The beam of light descended around them, preparing to transport them to the ship. Marcus took one last look at the world he was leaving behind. The soldiers, the news crews, the frightened civilians watching from a safe distance. They all seemed so small now, so limited by their inability to see beyond the boundaries of their own planet. But he did not feel superior to them. Instead, he felt a deep sense of responsibility. One day, when humanity was ready, he would return to help them take their place among the civilizations of the galaxy. The knowledge and experience he would gain as consort to an interstellar empress would eventually benefit his entire species. The light grew brighter, and Marcus felt himself being lifted from the earth that had been his home for 4 decades. As they rose toward the ship, he squeezed the Empress's hand and smiled. His coffee might have been spilled, but his life was just beginning. The interior of the Empress's ship was unlike anything Marcus could have imagined. As the transport beam delivered them into what he assumed was the main chamber, he found himself standing in a space that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The walls curved upward and away in directions that hurt his brain to follow, covered with surfaces that looked like flowing mercury, but felt warm and alive under his touch. Empress Zarathis released his hand and gestured around them with obvious pride. Her mental voice filled his consciousness as she explained that the ship, whose name translated roughly to harmony of distant stars, was not built, but grown from a symbiotic organism that existed in the spaces between realities. It had been her companion for over 3,000 years, and now it would be his as well. Marcus tried to process this information while simultaneously marveling at his transformed senses. He could feel the ship's presence in his mind, a vast and ancient consciousness that regarded him with curious interest. It was like being introduced to a mountain or an ocean, something so large and enduring that his human perspective could barely comprehend its scope. The ship communicated through emotions and images rather than words. It showed him glimpses of its journeys across the galaxy, the civilizations it had visited, the wonders it had witnessed. He saw worlds where crystals sang in harmony with wind patterns that lasted for centuries. He experienced the birth of stars as witnessed from the ship's observation decks. He felt the weight of time as measured in geological epochs rather than human lifespans. But the ship also showed him loneliness. For 3 millennia, it had carried only the Empress, serving as her transport, her palace, and her only true companion. The ship had watched her rule with wisdom and strength while yearning for someone who could share the burden of eternal responsibility. The ship's joy at Marcus's arrival was almost overwhelming, like a dog greeting its owner after years of separation. Zarathis led him through corridors that shifted and changed as they walked, adapting to their presence and needs. The ship anticipated their requirements before they even knew what they needed, providing everything from breathable atmosphere to gravitational fields that made walking comfortable despite their interstellar velocity. They passed chambers filled with technology that looked more like art than machinery. Crystalline structures grew from the walls and ceiling, pulsing with energy that powered systems Marcus could not begin to understand. Gardens of alien plants provided both beauty and life support, their leaves filtering air while their roots processed waste into useful materials. The Empress showed him the command center, a circular room where dozens of holographic displays showed real-time information from across her empire. Each of the 7 worlds appeared as a glowing sphere, surrounded by data streams that tracked everything from population health to resource distribution. Marcus found he could understand the alien symbols and numbers through his transformation, the information flowing into his mind as easily as reading English. He learned that the 7th Dominion, as her empire was known, encompassed 3 star systems and governed over 40 billion sentient beings. Each world had its own unique species and culture, united under the Empress's rule not through conquest but through voluntary association. She had spent centuries proving that different civilizations could work together for mutual benefit, creating a model of governance that had eliminated war, poverty, and disease across her domain. But the empire faced new challenges that required fresh perspectives. An unknown force was disrupting trade routes between star systems, causing ships to vanish without explanation. Several worlds were experiencing strange environmental changes that their scientists could not explain. Most troubling of all, ancient monitoring stations along the galaxy's rim had gone silent, suggesting something was approaching from the void between galaxies. The Empress showed Marcus to his quarters, a suite of rooms that the ship had designed specifically for his needs. The walls displayed real-time views of the space around them, showing Earth growing smaller in the distance. He watched his home planet become a blue dot, then disappear entirely as they entered hyperspace. The rooms were a fascinating blend of alien technology and familiar comforts. The ship had somehow analyzed his memories and preferences, creating spaces that felt both exotic and homely. A bed that could adjust its firmness and temperature in real time sat next to a desk made from what looked like crystallized starlight. Books appeared on shelves as he thought about wanting to read them, their text automatically translated into his language. Zarathis explained that they would spend the next several days in hyperspace, traveling to the capital world, where he would be formally introduced to the Empire. During this time, she would begin teaching him the skills necessary to help govern across interstellar distances. The ship would also continue his transformation, gradually awakening latent abilities that humans possessed, but had never learned to access. Marcus found himself able to communicate directly with the ship's consciousness, learning to navigate its corridors through thought rather than physical movement. The ship delighted in showing him its vast memory banks, containing the cultural heritage of dozens of civilizations. He could access the complete works of poets who had written on worlds orbiting distant stars, study scientific discoveries that had revolutionized entire species, and experience art forms that required senses humans did not naturally possess. But what amazed him most was the Empress herself. Away from the formal presentation she had maintained on Earth, Zarathus revealed herself to be both incredibly ancient and surprisingly young at heart. She had ruled for millennia, but she approached each new challenge with enthusiasm and curiosity. She genuinely cared about every being under her protection, remembering individuals from worlds she had visited centuries ago. She showed him her private memories, sharing the loneliness of absolute power and the weight of decisions that affected billions of lives. She had never allowed herself the luxury of doubt or weakness, maintaining strength for the sake of those who depended on her. But with Marcus, she could finally be vulnerable, could admit to fears and uncertainties she had carried alone for centuries. Through their mental connection, Marcus began to understand the true scope of what she was offering him. It was not just about power or adventure, though both would certainly be part of his new life. It was about partnership in the deepest sense. Two minds working together to solve problems that neither could handle alone. She brought cosmic perspective and technological mastery. He brought human intuition and the ability to see solutions that pure logic might miss. Their first test came sooner than expected. While they were still in hyperspace, the ship detected distress signals from one of the outer worlds. A massive storm system had formed in the planet's atmosphere, threatening to destroy several major cities. The local government was requesting immediate assistance, but their own ships could not reach the affected areas safely. Zarathus turned to Marcus, her golden eyes serious. This was exactly the kind of situation where human perspective might provide insights that alien logic could not. The storm was behaving in ways that violated known meteorological principles, suggesting it might be artificially created. But by whom and for what purpose? Marcus studied the incoming data, his enhanced mind processing information at speeds he was still learning to control. The storm patterns reminded him of something from Earth's history, specifically the way certain weather systems had been used as weapons during various wars. But this storm was far more sophisticated, designed not just to cause destruction but to target specific infrastructure while leaving other areas untouched. He shared his analysis with the Empress, suggesting that this was not a natural disaster but an attack by someone who understood the planet's vulnerabilities perfectly. The storm was being controlled by someone with intimate knowledge of the world's weather patterns and strategic importance. Together, they developed a response plan that combined her empire's advanced technology with his understanding of human tactics and psychology. The ship altered course, racing toward the threatened world at speeds that would have been impossible for any vessel not grown from interdimensional organisms. As they prepared to face their first crisis together, Marcus realized that his old life had truly ended. The homeless man who had spilled coffee on library steps no longer existed. In his place stood someone with the power to save entire civilizations and the responsibility to use that power wisely. The ship sang to him as they approached their destination, its ancient voice carrying harmonies that spoke of adventure, purpose, and the beginning of an epic journey that would span the stars. Marcus smiled and sang back, his human voice adding new melodies to songs that had echoed through space for millennia. The planet Velteron hung before them like a jewel caught in a spider's web of lightning. From orbit, Marcus could see the massive storm system that dominated the southern continent, its spiral arms reaching across thousands of miles with mathematical precision that no natural weather pattern could achieve. Lightning bolts the size of Earth's hurricanes danced between towering clouds that scraped the edge of space itself. The Empress stood beside him in the ship's observation deck, her face grave as she processed incoming reports from the planet's surface. 3 major cities were already experiencing catastrophic flooding, and the storm showed no signs of weakening. Worse, it was moving with deliberate purpose toward the capital city of Nethys Prime, home to 12 million beings. Marcus studied the storm through his enhanced senses, perceiving energy patterns and electromagnetic signatures that would have been invisible to his human eyes. What he saw confirmed his suspicions. The storm was definitely artificial, powered by technology that was sophisticated beyond anything the planet's inhabitants possessed. But more troubling was the realization that whoever created it knew exactly how Velteran's weather systems worked. The ship's consciousness shared additional data with him, showing detailed scans of the storm's structure. Hidden within the eye of the hurricane were mechanical components, devices that were manipulating atmospheric pressure and electromagnetic fields to maintain the storm's unnatural behavior. The technology was familiar, matching signatures from equipment used throughout the Seventh Dominion. This was an inside job. Zarathis reached the same conclusion moments after he did, her mental voice tight with controlled anger. Someone within her own empire was using her technology to attack one of her worlds. The betrayal cut deeper than any external threat could, violating the trust that held her diverse coalition together. The ship descended through the planet's atmosphere, its living hull adapting to the extreme conditions as they approached the storm system. Lightning struck them repeatedly, but the organic metal absorbed the energy and converted it into power for the ship's systems. They flew directly into the eye of the hurricane where the hidden machinery waited. What they found there was both impressive and horrifying. A network of weather control satellites hung in perfect formation, each one the size of a city block and bristling with equipment that could manipulate matter at the molecular level. They were creating the storm by forcing water, vapor to condense at specific altitudes while generating electromagnetic fields that guided lightning strikes with pinpoint accuracy. But the satellites were not just creating destruction randomly. Marcus analyzed their targeting patterns and realized they were specifically aimed at Veltaran's administrative centers, power generation facilities, and communication networks. Someone was trying to cripple the planet's ability to govern itself and communicate with the rest of the Empire. The Empress commanded the ship to scan the satellites for identification codes, hoping to trace them back to their source. What they discovered was worse than either had expected. The devices carried authorization signatures from Lord Commander Thexalis, one of the Empire's most trusted military leaders and a being who had served loyally for over 2,000 years. Zarathis's shock and pain flooded through their mental connection. Thexalis had been more than just a subordinate. He had been a friend, someone she had trusted with the lives of billions. His betrayal was not just a military threat but a personal wound that went deeper than any physical injury. Marcus placed his hand on her shoulder, offering what comfort he could while his mind raced through the implications. If Thexalis was behind this attack, it likely meant the conspiracy went far beyond weather control satellites. A military commander of his rank would have access to fleet movements, defensive positions, and communication codes for all 7 worlds. They needed to act quickly, but they also needed to be smart about it. Confronting Thexalis directly would alert him to their knowledge of his betrayal, potentially triggering whatever larger plan he was implementing. Instead, they needed to disable the storm while gathering evidence of the broader conspiracy. The ship extended tendrils of living metal toward the nearest satellite, making contact with its control systems. What they found was a sophisticated computer virus designed to hide the satellite's true purpose, while making them appear to be legitimate weather research equipment. The virus was elegant in its simplicity, exactly the kind of code that Thexalis would have access to through his military clearance. Marcus drew on his software engineering background, enhanced now by his transformation, to design a counter-virus that would not only disable the satellites, but also trace their communication pathways back to their command source. It was delicate work, requiring him to think like both a human programmer and an interdimensional consciousness simultaneously. Working together, Marcus and the ship's intelligence rewrote reality at the quantum level, inserting code into systems that operated on principles beyond human understanding. The satellite's control protocols began to unravel, their weather manipulation fields destabilizing as the storm system lost its artificial coherence. But they were not alone in the storm's eye. As the satellites began to shut down, emergency signals activated hidden defensive systems. Energy weapons emerged from concealed compartments, targeting the ship with beams that could have destroyed most vessels instantly. Zarathis responded with the fury of an Empress protecting her people. The ship's defensive systems came online, creating shields of crystallized space-time that deflected the attacks while launching counterstrikes of pure thought made manifest. The battle was fought on multiple levels simultaneously, combining physical weapons with mental assaults and reality manipulation on a cosmic scale. Marcus found himself acting on instincts he did not know he possessed, his consciousness merging with the ship's targeting systems to direct attacks with precision no purely artificial intelligence could achieve. His human intuition guided weapons that operated on alien principles, finding weaknesses in defenses that logical analysis might have missed. The satellite network collapsed within minutes, its weather control systems failing catastrophically as the storm began to dissipate. But the victory came with disturbing revelations. The satellite's final transmissions had been directed toward multiple locations throughout the Empire, suggesting that similar operations were either planned or already underway on other worlds. As they emerged from the dying storm, emergency broadcasts from across Veltaran confirmed the scope of the conspiracy. Government facilities that should have been protected by Thexalis's security protocols had been mysteriously vulnerable to the weather attacks. Communication networks that he oversaw had experienced convenient failures, just as the storm reached critical intensity. The planet's leaders appeared on the ship's communication screens, their relief at the storm's end, mixed with growing awareness that they had been betrayed by someone they had trusted completely. They reported that several other high-ranking officials had disappeared in the past few days, presumably either part of the conspiracy or eliminated because they posed a threat to it. Zarathus made the difficult decision to place the entire Empire on high alert while keeping their knowledge of Thexalis's betrayal secret. They needed to gather more evidence before making accusations, but they also needed to prevent further attacks. The ship began intercepting communications throughout the Empire, looking for patterns that might reveal the full scope of the conspiracy. What they found painted a terrifying picture. Thexalis had been preparing for this betrayal for decades, slowly placing his allies in key positions throughout the military and government. The weather attack on Veltaran was just the beginning of a coordinated coup attempt that would strike all 7 worlds simultaneously. Marcus realized that his arrival had disrupted their timeline. The prophecies that had led Zarathus to Earth had also been known to Thexalis, who understood that a human consort would strengthen the Empress's rule significantly. The coup had been moved up to prevent Marcus from becoming fully integrated into the Empire's power structure. As they prepared to return to the capital world, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had accepted the Empress's offer thinking he was escaping Earth's problems, but instead he had walked into a conspiracy that threatened the lives of 40 billion beings across 3 star systems. But he also felt something else: determination. The homeless man who had spilled coffee on library steps was gone forever, but the human capacity for resilience and adaptation remained. Marcus Thompson, consort to the Empress of 7 worlds, would not let his new family be destroyed by treachery and ambition. The ship sang a song of war as they departed Veltaran's orbit, its harmonies now carrying themes of justice and retribution. The hunt for Lord Commander Thexalis was about to begin, and it would test everything Marcus had learned about himself and his new abilities. The capital world of Nexardoth spread beneath them like a living constellation, its 7 city-states connected by streams of light that pulsed with the rhythm of 40 billion heartbeats. Each metropolis represented one of the allied species within the 7th Dominion, their architecture flowing together in harmonious patterns that spoke of unity achieved through diversity rather than conquest. Marcus stood in the ship's command center, watching Thexalis's personal flagship orbit the planet in its standard patrol route. The vessel looked innocent enough from a distance, but enhanced scans revealed hidden modifications that had been made over the past several months. Weapon systems that exceeded military regulations, communication arrays designed for coordinating large-scale operations, and shield generators powerful enough to withstand assault from an entire fleet. Zarathus maintained her usual schedule, attending the daily Council of Worlds meeting as if nothing had changed. Her performance was flawless, showing no sign that she suspected one of her most trusted commanders of treason. But through their mental link, Marcus felt her pain and anger burning like a star going supernova. The ship's consciousness had been busy during their journey from Veltaran, infiltrating communication networks throughout the Empire with surgical precision. What it discovered confirmed their worst fears. Thexalis's conspiracy involved at least 30% of the military leadership and reached into civilian governments on all 7 worlds. The coup was scheduled to begin in less than 72 hours, timed to coincide with the Festival of Unity that celebrated the Empire's founding. During the celebrations, when security would be focused on crowd control rather than military threats, Thexalis planned to eliminate the Empress and install himself as emperor. But Marcus's arrival had forced changes to their plan. The conspirators now knew that the Empress had gained a powerful ally, whose capabilities were still unknown. They had accelerated their timeline, planning to strike during the emergency session Zarathus had called to address the attack on Veltaran. Marcus studied the intelligence reports flowing through the ship's systems, his enhanced mind processing information faster than any computer could analyze it. The human pattern recognition abilities that had made him a good software engineer were now amplified to cosmic proportions, allowing him to see connections that pure logic might miss. He identified the conspiracy's greatest weakness: arrogance. Thexalis and his allies believed they understood how the Empire worked, but they had spent so long in positions of authority that they had forgotten what it felt like to fight from a position of disadvantage. They expected the Empress to react according to established protocols, not realizing that her human consort brought an entirely different approach to problem-solving. Working with the ship's intelligence, Marcus began implementing a strategy that combined alien technology with human psychological warfare. Instead of confronting the conspirators directly, he would turn them against each other by making each group believe the others had betrayed them. The first phase involved intercepting communications between conspiracy cells and subtly altering the messages. A report about troop movements would arrive with slightly different numbers. Coordination signals would be delayed by crucial minutes. Orders would contain minor modifications that changed their meaning in significant ways. The ship's living systems made these alterations virtually undetectable, rewriting quantum signatures at the subatomic level. To any scanning system, the messages appeared completely authentic, but the cumulative effect of hundreds of small changes began to undermine the conspirators' confidence in their communication network phase. 2 targeted the psychological profiles Marcus had compiled on each major conspirator. Military leaders who were motivated by personal ambition received evidence suggesting their allies planned to eliminate them once the coup succeeded. Scientists who had joined the conspiracy for ideological reasons found their research funding mysteriously redirected to projects that contradicted their beliefs. The ship extended its awareness throughout the capital's information networks, becoming an invisible presence that watched and listened to everything. It reported to Marcus that several conspiracy cells had already begun questioning their orders, while others were taking defensive measures against allies they no longer trusted. But Thexalis himself proved more resilient than expected. The Lord Commander had survived for 2 millennia by being both cunning and paranoid, qualities that served him well now. He began conducting his communications through courier ships that could not be intercepted electronically, while implementing security protocols that isolated his inner circle from the broader conspiracy. Marcus realized they needed a more direct approach. Through the ship's sensors, he studied Thexalis's personal habits and psychological profile, looking for weaknesses that could be exploited. What he found was both illuminating and disturbing. The Lord Commander was not motivated by simple ambition or greed. Intelligence reports revealed that he genuinely believed the Empire would be stronger under his leadership, but his reasoning was fundamentally flawed. Thexalis saw diversity as weakness rather than strength, viewing the cooperation between different species as an unstable arrangement that would inevitably collapse. He planned to restructure the Empire along strict hierarchical lines, with his own species at the top and others relegated to subordinate roles. It was a vision that would have seemed familiar to any human who had studied Earth's history of racism and imperialism, but applied on an interstellar scale. This revelation gave Marcus an idea for a strategy that would strike at the heart of Thexalis's beliefs, while demonstrating the power of the diversity he sought to destroy. Working with Zarathus, they began reaching out to representatives from each of the 7 worlds, not through official government channels, but through the informal networks that connected ordinary citizens across the Empire. The ship's communication arrays, enhanced by Marcus's understanding of social media and viral information distribution, began spreading a different kind of message throughout the Empire. Instead of military orders or political proclamations, they shared stories of cooperation and mutual aid between different species. Videos appeared on every communication network showing Feltaran citizens from different worlds working together to rebuild after the artificial storm. Musicians from all 7 species collaborated on songs that could only be performed using the unique abilities each race possessed. Scientists shared discoveries that had been made possible by combining different approaches to understanding reality. The response was overwhelming. Citizens throughout the Empire began organizing their own demonstrations of unity, creating art, music, and literature that celebrated their diversity while affirming their shared commitment to peaceful cooperation. The Festival of Unity, originally planned as a series of formal ceremonies, transformed into a spontaneous celebration that spanned all 7 worlds. Thexalis found himself fighting not just against the Empress's government, but against the will of the entire population. His propaganda efforts, which had been carefully crafted to appeal to species-based prejudices, were drowned out by a tsunami of content that demonstrated the benefits of unity over division. The psychological warfare campaign reached its climax when Marcus arranged for Thexalis to receive a personal message that appeared to come from his own flagship's computer systems. The message contained detailed plans for a counter-coup that would eliminate not just the Empress but also the Lord Commander himself, supposedly authored by his closest allies. The message was completely fabricated, but it was based on such detailed knowledge of the conspiracy that Thexalis could not dismiss it as enemy disinformation. The ship had analyzed thousands of hours of intercepted communications to create psychological profiles of each conspirator, allowing Marcus to craft a fictional betrayal that felt completely authentic. Paranoia spread through Thexalis's inner circle like a virus, with each member suspecting the others of planning to eliminate them. Security measures that had been designed to protect the conspiracy began to turn inward, as allies monitored each other for signs of treachery. The coup attempt began to collapse from within, as different factions moved against each other, convinced that their former allies had become their greatest enemies. Military units that should have been coordinating their attacks instead found themselves in standoff positions, uncertain who they could trust. But Thexalis himself remained dangerous even as his network crumbled around him. Intelligence reports indicated that he was preparing a final desperate assault on the Imperial Palace, using forces loyal only to him in a last attempt to seize power through direct violence. Marcus and Zarathis prepared for the final confrontation, knowing that their psychological warfare had succeeded in fragmenting the conspiracy, but had not eliminated its most dangerous element. The ship sang songs of approaching battle as it took position in orbit above the capital, its weapon systems charging, while its consciousness reached out to touch the minds of allies throughout the Empire. The hunt for Thexalis was about to become a direct confrontation that would test not just Marcus's new abilities, but his fundamental understanding of power, justice, and the price of protecting those who could not protect themselves. The homeless man from Earth was about to face his first real test as a ruler of worlds. The Imperial Palace of Nexardath rose from the planet's surface like a crystalline mountain, its 7 towers representing each world of the Dominion, built from materials that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The structure served as both seat of government and symbol of unity between species that had once been strangers across the void. Marcus stood in the palace's central command chamber alongside Empress Zarathis, watching tactical displays that showed Thexalis's forces moving into attack positions throughout the capital. The Lord Commander had abandoned subtlety in favor of a direct assault, gambling everything on a brutal strike that would either secure his victory or destroy him completely. The numbers were not encouraging. Despite the conspiracy's internal collapse, Thexalis still commanded 3 full battle groups plus elite guard units that had been personally loyal to him for centuries. His flagship hung in orbit like a predatory moon, its weapon systems charging to maximum power as it prepared to bombard the palace into submission. But Marcus was learning that in interstellar warfare, numbers meant less than understanding your enemy's psychology. Through the ship's network, he had been monitoring Thexalis's communications with his remaining forces, listening for clues about the Lord Commander's true mental state. What he heard was a being in the grip of desperate fury, lashing out at a universe that had refused to conform to his rigid vision of order. Thexalis was no longer fighting to implement a rational plan, but to punish those who had rejected his authority. He wanted to hurt the Empress and her new consort more than he wanted to rule effectively. This revelation gave Marcus an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. Instead of meeting Thexalis's attack with defensive measures, he proposed using the Lord Commander's rage against him. The ship's living systems could project a holographic duplicate of Marcus anywhere within the solar system, complete with realistic life signs and energy signatures that would fool even military-grade sensors. Working with the Empress and her palace guard, Marcus arranged for his duplicate to appear in several locations simultaneously, each one seemingly vulnerable to attack, but actually protected by defensive systems that would capture, rather than destroy any assault force. Thexalis's forces would find themselves pursuing shadows while the real Marcus remained safely hidden. The first phase of the battle began when Thexalis's flagship opened fire on the palace, its energy weapons carving deep gouges into the crystalline walls. But the palace had been built to withstand attacks from beings who commanded the power of stars, its defenses automatically adapting to counter each type of weapon used against it. Ground forces stormed the palace complex, expecting to find confused defenders scrambling to respond to the surprise attack. Instead, they encountered resistance that seemed to anticipate their every move, as if their opponents could read their minds and predict their actions. Palace guards appeared in perfect ambush positions, while force fields activated to trap assault teams in carefully prepared kill zones. Marcus watched the battle unfold from his hidden position, his consciousness linked to defensive systems throughout the palace complex. His human understanding of asymmetric warfare, enhanced by alien technology, allowed him to coordinate resistance efforts with a flexibility that pure military doctrine could not match. But the most effective weapon in his arsenal was psychological manipulation on a massive scale. The ship's consciousness had infiltrated the communication networks of Thexalis's forces, allowing Marcus to broadcast custom messages to individual soldiers based on their personal histories and motivations. Veterans who had served loyally for centuries received reminders of oaths they had sworn to protect civilians. Younger soldiers found themselves questioning orders that seemed to contradict everything they had been taught about honor and duty. Most effective of all, messages appeared to come from family members and friends, asking why they were attacking the very people they had sworn to protect. The assault began to lose momentum, as increasing numbers of soldiers abandoned their positions or actively switched sides. Unit cohesion collapsed as commanders found themselves leading forces that no longer trusted their orders or believed in their cause. Thexalis responded with increasing brutality, ordering his remaining loyal forces to fire on anyone who showed signs of wavering. This created exactly the psychological effect Marcus had hoped for, demonstrating that the Lord Commander was willing to kill his own people to maintain power. The turning point came when one of Thexalis's own battle groups turned their weapons on his flagship, their commander broadcasting a message declaring that they would no longer serve a leader who had betrayed everything the Empire stood for. The subsequent firefight in orbit above the capital provided a spectacular light show that could be seen across half the planet. But Thexalis himself proved more dangerous when cornered than Marcus had anticipated. The Lord Commander abandoned his disabled flagship in a small assault craft, descending toward the palace with the desperate intensity of a being who had nothing left to lose. His craft bristled with experimental weapons that he had been saving for a final assault on the Empress herself. Marcus realized that the psychological warfare phase was over. Thexalis could no longer be manipulated or distracted, because he had moved beyond rational thought into pure obsession. The final confrontation would require direct action, with all the risks that entailed. Emerging from his hidden position, Marcus made his way to the palace's central spire, where Zarathus waited in the throne room that served as the symbolic heart of the Empire. The chamber was vast enough to hold representatives from all 7 worlds, its walls displaying real-time images from across the Dominion. Thexalis's assault craft crashed through the spire's defensive barriers, his personal shields protecting him from impacts that would have killed any unenhanced being. He strode into the throne room like an avatar of vengeance, his weapon systems charging as he prepared to end the reign of the Empress who had rejected his vision of order. But he stopped when he saw Marcus standing beside the throne, no longer hiding behind deception or misdirection. The human who had spilled coffee on Earth library steps now faced the Lord Commander of an interstellar empire, and the contrast between them could not have been more stark. Thexalis was everything that military power and technological enhancement could create. A being of terrible strength and ancient wisdom, armed with weapons that could level cities and protected by defenses that had been tested in 100 wars. He radiated authority and command presence that had shaped the destiny of civilizations. Marcus was still fundamentally human, despite his transformation. He carried no weapons, wore no armor, and commanded no armies. But he possessed something that Thexalis had never understood, the ability to inspire loyalty through service. Rather than demand obedience through power, the Lord Commander launched his attack with all the fury of a being who had ruled for millennia, his weapons unleashing energies that warped space-time itself. But Marcus did not try to match him in raw power. Instead, he did something that confused and enraged his opponent. He began to speak. Not commands or threats, but questions. Marcus asked Thexalis why he was destroying the very empire he claimed to love. He pointed out the contradiction between seeking to unite species through force while using division as a weapon. He challenged the Lord Commander to explain how his vision of hierarchical control would improve the lives of the beings he sought to rule. The questions hit harder than any weapon could have, because they forced Thexalis to confront the fundamental emptiness at the heart of his philosophy. He had spent centuries building a beautiful structure of rationalization around his desire for absolute power, but Marcus's simple questions revealed it as a hollow shell with no foundation in genuine concern for others. As Thexalis's rage grew, his attacks became more desperate and less controlled. He began making tactical errors that the ship's defensive systems could exploit, while his fury interfered with the precise control necessary to operate his most sophisticated weapons. The final blow came not from Marcus, but from the Lord Commander himself. In a desperate attempt to kill both the Empress and her consort, Thexalis activated a weapon that would have destroyed the entire palace complex along with anyone inside it. But his calculation was flawed, based on an understanding of Marcus that was 3 days out of date. The human who had accepted the Empress's offer was no longer the same being who stood before Thexalis now. Marcus had grown in power and understanding with each passing hour, his consciousness expanding to encompass abilities that even he did not fully comprehend. Instead of fleeing from the Lord Commander's final weapon, Marcus reached out with his enhanced mind and simply turned it off, not through technological means or superior firepower, but through an understanding of reality that transcended both. The weapon's energy dissipated harmlessly, leaving Thexalis defenseless before the judgment of those he had sought to destroy. In the end, it was not Marcus who delivered the final blow, but the ship itself, extending its consciousness through the palace's living systems to restrain the Lord Commander in bonds that existed on multiple dimensional levels simultaneously. Thexalis found himself unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but observe as his millennia-long reign of terror came to an end. Marcus looked down at the defeated Lord Commander and felt not triumph but sadness. Thexalis had possessed the power to build something beautiful, and instead had chosen to tear down what others had created. He had been given the privilege of serving something greater than himself, and had squandered it in pursuit of personal glorification. The battle was over, but Marcus knew that the real work was just beginning. An empire that had been shaken by betrayal and internal conflict would need time to heal, and healing would require the kind of patient, persistent effort that built trust through daily actions rather than grand gestures. As news of the Lord Commander's defeat spread throughout the 7 worlds, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling more firmly on his shoulders. He was no longer just the human who had accepted an alien empress's offer of partnership. He was now a proven leader who had faced the Empire's greatest internal threat and emerged victorious. The homeless man who had spilled coffee was gone forever, replaced by someone who could stand as an equal beside beings who commanded the power of stars. But the human capacity for growth, adaptation, and hope remained, ready to face whatever challenges the galaxy might bring. In the end, it was not Marcus who delivered the final blow, but the ship itself, extending its consciousness through the palace's living systems to restrain the Lord Commander in bonds that existed on multiple dimensional levels simultaneously. Thexalis found himself unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but observe as his millennia-long reign of terror came to an end. Marcus looked down at the defeated Lord Commander and felt not triumph but sadness. Thexalis had possessed the power to build something beautiful, and instead had chosen to tear down what others had created. He had been given the privilege of serving something greater than himself, and had squandered it in pursuit of personal glorification. The battle was over, but Marcus knew that the real work was just beginning. An empire that had been shaken by betrayal and internal conflict would need time to heal, and healing would require the kind of patient, persistent effort that built trust through daily actions rather than grand gestures. As news of the Lord Commander's defeat spread throughout the 7 worlds, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling more firmly on his shoulders. He was no longer just the human who had accepted an alien Empress's offer of partnership. He was now a proven leader who had faced the Empire's greatest internal threat and emerged victorious. The homeless man who had spilled coffee was gone forever, replaced by someone who could stand as an equal beside beings who commanded the power of stars. But the human capacity for growth, adaptation, and hope remained, ready to face whatever challenges the galaxy might bring. 6 months after the defeat of Lord Commander Thexalis, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the living ship, watching the sunrise over New Geneva, the newest addition to the 7th Dominion. The world hung before them like a blue-green jewel, its continent still scarred from the mining operations that had stripped it bare before the Empire's arrival. But those scars were healing now. Terraforming vessels worked around the clock to restore the planet's ecosystem, their organic technology coaxing life from barren soil and poisoned oceans. What had once been a corporate wasteland was transforming into a garden world, where refugees from across the galaxy could build new homes and new lives. Empress Zarathis joined him at the viewing port, her presence still generating the same warmth and energy that had first drawn him to accept her offer. But their relationship had evolved beyond the formal partnership they had begun with. They were now true equals, their minds so closely linked that they often shared thoughts without realizing it. The aftermath of Thexalis's coup attempt had revealed the Empire's underlying strength. Instead of fragmenting under pressure, the 7 worlds had pulled together more tightly than ever before. Citizens who had previously taken their freedom and prosperity for granted now understood how precious these gifts were and how much effort was required to maintain them. Marcus had played a crucial role in the healing process, traveling to each world to meet with leaders and ordinary citizens alike. His human perspective had proven invaluable in understanding the psychological trauma that the conspiracy had inflicted on the Empire's people. Betrayal by trusted leaders created wounds that went deeper than any physical damage, requiring careful attention to restore the bonds of trust that held civilization together. The trials of the conspirators had been conducted openly, with full transparency that allowed every citizen to understand exactly what had happened and why. Instead of seeking revenge, the Empire had focused on justice and rehabilitation, even for those who had committed the most serious crimes. Thexalis himself had been sentenced to live among the refugees on New Geneva, stripped of his powers and technologies but given the chance to earn redemption through service to those he had sought to oppress. It was a fate that many considered worse than execution, forcing the former Lord Commander to confront the consequences of his actions every day. But the most significant change had been the expansion of the Empire's democratic institutions. Marcus had proposed and Zarathis had endorsed a new system of governance that gave each world greater autonomy, while maintaining the unity that made their cooperation possible. The Empress remained the ultimate authority, but her power was now shared with elected councils that represented every species and every perspective within the Dominion. The transformation had not been without challenges. Some traditionalists argued that democracy would weaken the Empire's ability to respond quickly to threats. Others worried that allowing too much local autonomy would lead to the same kind of fragmentation that had destroyed previous galactic civilizations. Marcus addressed these concerns by drawing on his experience with human history, explaining how democratic institutions could actually strengthen unity by giving everyone a stake in the system's success. He shared stories of Earth's greatest democratic movements, showing how ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they believed their voices mattered. The ship's consciousness had been invaluable in implementing these changes, its vast intelligence networks allowing for real-time communication between worlds that were separated by distances too great for traditional technology to bridge. Citizens could now participate in empire-wide discussions and decision-making processes regardless of which world they lived on. The results had exceeded everyone's expectations. Proposals for new policies came from grassroots organizations on remote worlds, rather than just government bureaucracies. Scientific research projects involved collaboration between species that had never worked together before. Art and culture flourished as creators found new audiences across the entire empire. But perhaps the most important change was the Empire's new mission beyond its borders. Intelligence gathered during the fight against Thexalis had revealed the existence of the threat that had been approaching from the void between galaxies. An ancient machine intelligence that consumed entire civilizations, converting their resources into more machines that could spread further across the universe. The Devourer, as the intelligence was known from fragmentary records left by previous victims, had already consumed 3 smaller galaxies and was now approaching. The Milky Way, its advanced scouts, had been responsible for the disappearances of ships and monitoring stations that had first alerted the Empire to the danger. Facing this threat would require more than just the 7 worlds of the Dominion. It would need the cooperation of every advanced civilization in the galaxy, many of which had been enemies for thousands of years. The task seemed impossible, but Marcus had learned that impossible was just another word for something no one had figured out how to do yet. Working with Zarathus, he had begun reaching out to other galactic powers, not as conquerors or rulers but as fellow beings facing extinction. The approach was radically different from traditional diplomacy, focusing on shared survival rather than competing interests. The response had been mixed but encouraging. Some civilizations remained too suspicious of the Seventh Dominion to consider alliance, but others had begun tentative cooperation in areas where their interests aligned. Trade agreements led to cultural exchanges, which opened the door for scientific collaboration and eventually military coordination. Marcus found himself becoming the Empire's ambassador to species that had never encountered humans before. His perspective as someone who understood both powerlessness and responsibility resonated with leaders who were struggling to protect their own people from threats they could not fully comprehend. The ship had evolved as well, its consciousness expanding to encompass new forms of existence that bridged the gap between organic and artificial intelligence. It could now communicate directly with machine intelligences, biological hive minds, and energy beings that existed as pure thought. This made it uniquely qualified to serve as a translator between species that might otherwise never understand each other. But the greatest change was in Marcus himself. The homeless man who had spilled coffee on library steps was now someone who could stand before the Galactic Assembly and speak with the authority of one who had faced ultimate tests and emerged stronger. He had learned to balance human compassion with cosmic responsibility, finding ways to care for individuals while making decisions that affected billions of lives. His relationship with Zarathus had deepened into something that transcended conventional categories. They were partners, friends, lovers, and co-rulers all at once, their minds so intertwined that they often functioned as a single consciousness operating through 2 bodies. But they maintained their individual perspectives and personalities, creating a harmony that was greater than the sum of its parts. As they watched New Geneva's sunrise paint the sky in shades of hope, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 6 months ago, he had been a failed software engineer with no prospects and no future. Now he was helping to coordinate the defense of an entire galaxy against a threat that could end all organic life. The irony was not lost on him. He had accepted the Empress's offer because he had nothing left to lose, but in doing so he had gained everything that truly mattered. Purpose, partnership, the chance to make a difference on a scale he had never imagined possible. The ship's consciousness touched his mind, sharing images of the work ahead. Diplomatic missions to species that communicated through quantum entanglement, military preparations for battles that would be fought across multiple dimensions simultaneously, scientific research projects that would push the boundaries of what reality itself could support. It would be dangerous work, with no guarantee of success. The Devourer had consumed civilizations far more advanced than any in the Milky Way, turning their own technologies against them in ways that defied comprehension. But Marcus had learned something during his time as a homeless man that served him well now. Sometimes the only way to win was to refuse to surrender. Even when defeat seemed inevitable, Zarathus squeezed his hand, her mental voice carrying harmonies of love, determination, and unshakable faith in their ability to overcome any challenge together. Around them, The ship sang its ancient songs of journey and discovery, ready to carry them wherever the galaxy's defense might require. The homeless man who had spilled coffee was gone, but his essential humanity remained, enhanced and amplified by technologies beyond imagination. Marcus Thompson, consort to the Empress of 7 worlds, co-defender of the galaxy, and living proof that sometimes the most extraordinary adventures begin with the most ordinary moments. As New Geneva completed its rotation and day gave way to night, Marcus smiled and began planning for tomorrow. There was work to do, civilizations to save, and impossible odds to overcome. It was exactly the kind of challenge that humans had been born to face, and he could hardly wait to get started.